Hello and welcome back to my Dandelion Diaries. Today I'm going to be going on with another ink exploration, and we're doing probably one of my ultimate favorite colors to write with, and that is green. And I'm gonna be honest, I had some struggles when narrowing down what to pick. When I first did my green ink explorations last year, I broke it up into a bunch of categories, but this year I'm really trying to show off, I guess, different brands that are all green, or like a different ink from each brand that is green, if that makes sense. Focusing more on variety of brands versus variety of colors. I mean, it's kind of both though. Anyways, I have 24 inks that I'm going to attempt to fit on 2 pages. I have 21 samples, and then I have 3 bottles that I'm going to be showing today too. But first off, let me go through supplies like normal. I'm still in my A5 Hobonichi notebook with the original Tomoe River paper. I'm going to be using my Glass Dip Airbond pen today, a dropper, my little acrylic stamp block to make the swatches, and then I have my t-shirt and some jars of water over here. I'm going to try to go from lightest to darkest just to try to save my water. So let's just get started with the very first ink I have today, and that is Troublemaker's Kelp Tea. And this ink is very much a shaded, like greenish olivey color. I honestly love the base of this kind of being more of like a sagey olive green, and then it has some shading that goes more like a beige. It's beautiful. My only thing with this ink, which I find kind of common with most of the Troublemaker inks, is that it has a bit of a dryness to it. So it works really great if you have a super juicy pen, but if you have a really dry writer and you put this in there, there's a lot of hard starts and it's not a very pleasant experience, at least from what I've had with it. I love the color though. Not worth the full bottle to me just because of the dryness factor, but it is a beautiful, beautiful shader if you like shading inks and you like a little bit of a drier ink. Next up, I have KWZ's Old Gold number 2. So I actually misspoke. This is KWZ's Green Gold number 2, not Old Gold. Old Gold is a nice gold color. But this Green Gold number 2 has some beautiful shading to it, which I'll talk a little bit more about once it dries completely down. I do want to mention that KWZ inks do have a scent to them, which I know I have said with every time I introduce a color by this brand. It just has a very sweet vanilla smell, but the color of this green is kind of a grassy, warm yellow green, and then the shading adds a little bit more to that. Beautiful color, beautiful ink, good writing. It's a nice green color. Next we have Les Artisans Encre Classique, and I believe it's Vert, Moyen, Mousse or Mousse. And this is a nice grassy green color, very nature green, like a warm spring green. I actually have been a huge fan of this brand lately, mainly because they are super affordable. You can get samples from Vanessa pens, at least if you're in the States. I really like this brand. The flow is really good as well. I've never had any issues with writing with it. It's just a really like standard classic brand that I'm really starting to like more and more the more I use the ink that I have by them. But the color of this green, like I said, is a very spring green. It's cooler than the Green Gold by the KWZ, but it is still pretty green. I don't really have any other descriptors other than it reminds me of like a big green grass field. Like it's just a nice grassy green color. Next up we have Kobe number 67, and this is Ogo Farm Green. And this green ink is very much the same as the other 2 I just swatched. It is a nice warm grassy spring green, a bit more on the yellow side. It's quite lovely and has some really nice shading to it. This ink is pretty juicy. It's a nice well-flowing ink. I wouldn't consider it overly wet, but it does have a good consistency with writing, which I've experienced most of the time with any of the Kobe inks. I do find this brand to be a little bit more on the higher price range, but they are made in Korea, I believe, and it is a beautiful ink nonetheless. I do also want to mention that Kobe has several different shades of green in their collection. This is just the one that I decided to go with, the one I reached for first, and I honestly like this one a lot, but there's other ones in the brand that are really, really good as well. Next up, we have Paper Plume's Moss Green. And this technically could probably be considered almost a brown to some. I really do consider this to be a green, just more of like a brown green or an olive green. And if I'm being honest, this is one of my favorite colors to write with, but it is often called like diarrhea brown or baby poop brown. So I know it's not everybody's cup of tea when it comes to a color like this. I do want to say that Paper Plume is a very nice brand in terms of inks. They have a whole bunch of different colors. A lot of their inks shade really well, which this one does too. Like, it's also a good shader. And they are, I believe, pretty reasonable in price, at least here in the US. I'm not sure how that changes if there's other retailers outside, because I just don't have that experience. But the color of this is fantastic as a nice, you know, mossy nature green color. Honestly, kind of close to the next ink that I'm gonna do, which is Dominant Industries Autumn Forest. And Autumn Forest is part of Dominant Industries Pearl series, which means it has shimmer. So this shimmer is a nice, beautiful, rosy gold color, and the ink itself is much like the moss green, and that it's more of a brownish green. And like I said, this ink is one of those kind of like more brown green colors. The base of it is kind of more of a muted color tone. Like, it's very much even towards a grayish side, very dynamic. And with the rose gold shimmer with this, it just looks fantastic. I have actually inked this up with and without shimmer and loved it every single time. It is just a really beautiful color. Dominant Industry makes some fabulous greens. I almost included natural green in this, which was sent to me by Allison, or even tuna and olives, which was also sent to me by Allison. Both of those are excellent contenders for a Dominant Industry green. I don't think they could go wrong with a green. They're all just been fabulous so far. Next up, we have Herbin's Vert Olive. And I consider this color to be 100% like chartreuse yellow green. It is bright, it is beautiful, it has a little bit of shading going on with it, and honestly, it's just a really fun color. I don't usually steer towards these super vibrant light greens. I have another one by Ferris Press called Frivolous Lime that I'm not really a fan of because it's a bit too light. But if you wanted one a little bit darker, this is a fantastic choice, being that it is more of a limey green, chartreuse green color. Very bright, very light, and really good. Next up, we have a bit of a newer ink, and this is by Wearingeul, and it is the Peter Pan ink. And the color of this is kind of like Troublemaker's Kelp Tea, and that it's more of that kind of like light sagey green color, a bit more of like a not cooler green, like grayish green maybe. But it does have shading, and the shading does go more towards a beigey color. I really like this one. Honestly, if I were to pick a Kelp Tea over Peter Pan, or between Kelp Tea and Peter Pan, I'd probably pick the Peter Pan. It's a little bit wetter, still a little dry, but it's wetter than the Troublemaker's Kelp Tea. But it's honestly a really unique color, and I don't really find a lot of shaders that do the green to beige kind of situation. Next up, we have Colorverse's Walk the Dog. And again, this is another one of those nice light grassy green colors. It is not quite as yellow as like the farm green or the green gold. It is a bit more neutral leaning, even maybe a little bit of brown in there. It's a beautiful color, really nice consistency. Only thing I find with the Colorverse inks is that they are a bit pricier for the amount of ink that you're getting in a bottle. So I usually just stick to samples, if I'm being honest, because I don't use their inks quite enough for me to warrant purchasing a bottle of them. Anyways, the color of this is fantastic. It's a nice grassy green color, and it's a great consistency. No problems whatsoever with this one. It's just a nice light green color. Next up, I have an ink that was sent to me courtesy of Sarah, so thank you. And this is Vinta Sea Kelp. The color of sea kelp is definitely a sea kelp color. It looks kind of like seaweed, and when it shades down, it has almost a seaweed-like look to it as well. It's very nautical green. Like, it's just a really cool color. I personally think I have another ink that is really close to this, so I don't know if I could warrant picking up more of it, but I'm really grateful to get to play with this sample for sure. It is definitely a fun ink, and I'm going to look more into the Vinta brand just because I have a few of their inks, but I haven't had enough of them to really make a firm opinion on them. And with that, the next ink I have is Rohrer and Klingner's Alt Goldgrun, and this is probably one of my favorite light green inks out there. So this ink is one of my favorite light greens, primarily because of the shading that it has going on with it. It is very dynamic shading, but also because of the price point for me. So I can get this ink in a full bottle from Cult Pens for a very great price. And then if you go to other retailers like in the US, it's a little bit more expensive, but still a really decent price for the amount of ink that you're getting. I'm not going to name numbers just because that fluctuates so much, but basically I want to say that you get a lot of ink for your dollar with this. Also, the flow of Rohrer and Klingner inks is always great. It is very nice and flowing, sometimes super wet depending on the pen, but I've never had a dry experience even with a drier pen with this ink brand. Not going to call it my favorite ink brand, but it's definitely in the top 5, and they have quite a few colors that I am absolutely in love with, like some of their purples are just amazing, which I think I talked about in my purple video. Anyways, beautiful color, beautiful shading, and really great flowing ink from a really great brand. And next up I have Robert Oster's Detox. And this color is a very hard one to describe, if I'm being honest. It is green, but it's also kind of brown, but it's also kind of, I don't know, black even in some areas. It's just a very unique color. I believe this ink was released in 2023, maybe 2022, so it is a fairly recent color that Robert Oster has produced. But Robert Oster inks in general, I've always loved. Like, I've never had one that I have not fallen in love with, if I'm being honest. And I have, I think, 3 or 4 bottles of ink by them. But the sample of Detox that I have is great. It's fantastic. I've put it in a Lamy before and have had a great experience. It's a really cool color. And then I have Noodlers Army Green, which is kind of like the last lightish green color that I'm going to do. And I have some thoughts on this one. And the thoughts that I have are basically that it's a beautiful color and I love the shading in this ink. But I have problems with the Noodlers brand. And I've talked about this when I usually swatch Noodlers, is that they are very wet. They hardly ever dry down for me. And I just generally have problems with this brand of ink. And it hurts me to say that because these inks are fantastically affordable, at least here in the US. And there's 1,020,000 colors like to pick from. There's so many different colors they have. But this one, I don't really have as bad of a drying problem as some of the other ones I have, like my Noodlers Purple or my Noodlers Red. Sometimes those can be really, really wet and they just never dry down. But this one, it does okay. Next up, we have one of my favorite ink brands right now, and that is Birmingham Pen Company's Emerald Fusion. And this sample was given to me by Zavi, so thank you so much. And I'm really excited to see the sheen on this baby. And this is by far one of my favorite green shading inks now. I inked this up in my Heinz or Henze Pen Company pen that I actually was just talking about, the Noodlers thing. And it was really a fun experience. I love the sheen on this. It is very high sheen, very bright green sheen, but the flow of this is fantastic, which I find with all of the Birmingham Pen Company inks, just the flow is incredible. The only thing with this brand that I find is kind of a disappointment is that they don't offer international shipping. So the only times you could get it outside of the US is if you had a pen friend send you something, or you came to the US to get it at their location in Pennsylvania, which is kind of disappointing considering the inks are absolutely incredible. But the color of this is a bright green. The bright green sheen kind of takes over a lot of it, and it's just a really fun ink. This is now on my full bottle wish list for the next time that I can make a purchase from Birmingham Pen Company, and I'm really in love with this ink. Next up, we have Kaweco's Palm Green. And this is a nice kind of more neutral to the cool side blue side green. It is very beachy palm tree green when the leaves are green, at least. I actually like the Kaweco inks. There's quite a range of colors, not a whole bunch, but a range at least. And they offer most of their inks in cartridges, which I find to be really handy, especially for the Kaweco pens, because the little converters that come with the Kaweco pens are pretty small. So having a cartridge is nice because that holds a little bit more ink. But the color of this is definitely more of a medium green, even to a dark green in some areas. It's very nice, very true green, maybe a little bit on the blue side, but it's pretty true to green. And next up, I have an ink courtesy of Sorsha, and this is Diamine's Golden Ivy. And this is a beautiful medium to dark green color with gold shimmer and a little bit of a red sheen going on, but it's not super, super strong. I really enjoy this ink. I think it is fantastic, but it's a lot like two of the other inks that I have, and I was not expecting that. But let me talk about Diamine for a minute. Diamine is tried and true brand. It has been around for ever. They have 1,020,000 colors. The flow of their inks kind of range depending on the ink, so it's a little bit like hit or miss. Their shimmer inks are great. They don't typically clog the pens that I have used them with, and I definitely think this is a really great brand because of their price point. If you get them from a European retailer, you can get them for a very affordable price, and they, like I said, have 1,020,000 colors to pick from, and yeah. So with the Diamine Golden Ivy, I want to talk about at least one of the inks that I feel is really similar, and this is by Ferris Press. This was a recent release. This is their Emerald Gardens, and it has gold to green shimmer in it. So this one's just gold shimmer, this one's gold to green. But Golden Ivy is also a lot like Ferris Press's Sunlit Jade, which I've swatched before, which I'll get to towards the end of this video. But I wanted to put these next to each other to see how similar they are and how different they are, because I know they're not quite the same. So as a wet swatch compared to Golden Ivy, it is much more on the yellow side and a much brighter looking, a bit more green too. Golden Ivy is a little bit more cooler. I'll compare them more once it's fully dried, but I do want to say that the flow on these is almost identical. So the flow of the Diamine Golden Ivy versus the flow of the Ferris Press and Emerald Gardens, they're very nice flowing. Honestly, if I didn't already have the bottle of Emerald Gardens, I probably would pick up a bottle of Golden Ivy just because the price point of the Diamine ink is much more affordable than that of the Ferris Press. I am an ambassador for Ferris Press, so I was given this ink to review and showcase, and I would have happily purchased this myself. But since I have swatched Golden Ivy too, I think I would go for the Golden Ivy just because the price point's a little bit more budget friendly. Next up, we have Pelikan's Edelstein's Aventurine. And this is a very nice deep green color. It does have a little bit of shading, not enough for me to really just be wowed about, but it is a nice flowing ink. I find with the Pelikan Edelsteins, it's hit or miss whether it's dry or not, but with this one, it's okay. It's not terrible. I personally don't really reach for this color very often, and I think it's because I have several inks that are this exact same color. So for this one, it's just if you like the brand better than anything else. But the color of this is a beautiful deep green color, a little bit of shading like I said, and it has a nice flow for Pelikan ink. I don't reach for this one, so I don't really have a whole lot to say about it. Next up, we have Lamy Green. And this is one of their classic green colors. It is beautiful. It does have a little bit of shading, and I kind of like it. The green is more on the cool tone side. It definitely has more of a blueness to it, but it's not as wishy-washy as the other standard Lamy inks. So if you've ever tried like standard Lamy Blue or standard Lamy Blue Black or standard Lamy Red even, it has a bit of a wishy-washy look to it, or it's kind of washed out in some areas, at least with swatching. With writing, it definitely just doesn't look as deep of a color. It just looks more towards like a true red or a true blue or a true green. Next up, we have another ink from a pen friend, and this is Monteverde's Malachite. This is from Kristen, so thank you, Kristen. And this is a beautiful kind of deep green color. I personally really enjoy Monteverde Green inks and Monteverde as a brand. I find their inks to be incredibly affordable. You can get like 30 bills for less than $10. I find that this specific green ink is a very nice foresty green, a little bit more on the yellow leaning green, which is interesting because forest greens typically lean more towards the blue, but I find this one to be a little bit more on the yellow side. Not by much though. The flow of this is really nice. I have not yet inked it in a pen, but if it behaves like any of the other Monteverde inks I use in pens, it's going to behave beautifully. Next up, we have 3 Oysters. I color you Namsan. And this is another one of those beautiful, more foresty green colors. It's dark green, I would say, for sure. It does have a little bit of sheen when it dries all the way down, which is complementary to the green, I'll say. And it does have a very minor amount of shading, but nothing super, super crazy. I like this ink, but I'm not reaching for it very often, just I guess because I have so many other dark greens that I like more. But 3 Oysters is a very small brand, and they have a few colors that I really enjoy. Delicious Mustard by them is probably my ultimate favorite color, and their ink bottles themselves are really nifty because they have a corner cut where you can just tilt it on its side and it sits that way, which is kind of fun. But overall, color-wise, it's nice. It's dark green, has a little bit of shading and some shading going on. Yeah, that's about it. And after that, I have Private Reserve's Avocado. I almost did Private Reserve's Infinity Pine Green instead, but since I already talked about their Infinity inks, I wanted to show something a little bit different. And this Private Reserve ink is a nice kind of warm green color, but it has a little bit of a green to black going on in some areas too. Initially, when I picked up this ink, I really wanted to see it next to Robert Oster's Avocado, and I adore Robert Oster Avocado. It's a nice light green with some really cool chroma shading going on that goes kind of like more to a beige, kind of like the Peter Pan and Troublemaker, if I'm being honest. But this ink by Private Reserve, this Avocado, is nothing at all like that. It is dark green with light green and kind of black green areas too. Nice shading, but it's not what I wanted when I went for it, so I don't really reach for this one very much either. And the second to last ink I have is a brand new ink, so I've had like no time to play with this. But this is Sailor Manyo's Ishi, which is one of their new inks out of, I think, 5 or 6 that they just came out with. And this ink is a beautiful, cool-toned green color. A little more on the blue side than the yellow side, but kind of neutral as well in some areas. It's beautiful. I haven't had time to ink this in a pen, but if it behaves like the other Sailor Manyo inks, it's going to be a winner. That line of inks has so many beautiful colors going on, so many chroma shading colors going on. It's just a really fun line of inks. I actually swatched the entire collection that I had of them at the time, and now I feel like I need to do a re-collection video because they've added more inks to it. But anyways, it's a beautiful ink line for sure. The color of this, like I said, is more of a cool tone green. I have not experienced any of the chroma shading with it, but it does have normal shading where it has a range of greens within it, which, you know, is always a winner for me because I do adore my shading inks. And the last ink that I want to talk about today is a new-ish ink. It is new as of this year, and I only purchased a bottle of this because of the novelty of it. So let me move my notebook aside really quick and let me talk about this ink. Okay, so this is the Endless Alchemy's Mystic Forest, and they released 4 colors. There was like Wizard's Pencil, candy something, and then a red one, I think that had Mars. But this ink is so cool primarily because of the bottle. So you get this little cork base with a little hole in it, and then the bottles themselves are hand blown, so each of the nipples on the bottom of the glass are different, and you basically can set it in the little rest here if you want it to be stable, or you can flip the cork base over and you have like this little, like, it's just so cool. Like, I guess the science of this is just awesome to me. So I got the bottle for the novelty, and I'll show you the ink now because the ink is really pretty too. So Mystic Forest by Endless Alchemy is a nice dark green color. It is definitely a forest green, a bit more of a cool toned forest green, and it has a little bit of shading going on with it as well. Beautiful, beautiful consistency in dip pens that I've tried it with. I have not put this in a fountain pen yet, but if it behaves the way it did with a dip pen, I'm going to be in love with it already. Honestly, I love the depth of the color with this. I wish it had a little bit more shading going on, or even kind of a fun, like, bright sheen with it or something, since it is more of a unique style of bottle, a bit more of a, you know, I don't know, chemistry-like look to it. I wanted it to be really exciting. And the ink is exciting, but I want more. And I may end up adding shimmer to this or something with like a glitter potion just to make it even more oomphy. I don't know, but it's a beautiful ink, and the bottle is definitely a fun one to have. And I definitely jumped when I saw the bottles released because the bottle is just such a novelty. It's just so unique. Alrighty, I'm gonna let these finish drying all the way down, and then I'll be back in a minute to showcase the close-ups and the previous season of green inks. I do like how this is kind of like light green versus dark green. It's kind of cool to me, but I'll see you guys in a bit. Okay, I am back. It's actually only been about 20 minutes. So with the power of movie video editing, this was no time at all for you, but I'm going to zoom in and show you guys some close-ups of these with the shading and some sheens that we have going on. So starting off, we had Troublemaker's Kelp Tea. Wonderful chroma shader, absolutely gorgeous. Like I said, it's kind of like that brownish sagey green color, a little bit of a pink beige shade going on in some areas. Greenish haloing, very dynamic ink, very interesting shading, but it is a bit dry, so just keep that in mind if you're not a fan of drier inks. Then we had KWZ's Green Gold number 2. Like I said, just has some nice shading with this one. It does have a little bit of a green sheen that's showing up in part of the swatch here, kind of like in this area, but it's not super strong. I like this one, and looking at it next to the Kobe ink is really interesting, so we'll get to that in a second. After that, we had Little Artisan's Vert Moyen Mousse, and again, beautiful shading. This one's much more of a grassy green, like a spring green, whereas the Green Gold is a bit more of a yellow green. Both still very much a springish, light grassy green color though. Then we had Kobe's 67 Ogo Farm Green, much like the KWZ Green Gold number 2, almost identical actually. The Green Gold is a bit more yellow and the Farm Green is a bit more green. Yeah, don't know if that made sense, but it's a beautiful color, nice shading with this one as well, and has a very minor green sheen to it as well. Very interesting that those two are so close together though. Then we had Papier Plume's Moss Green. I love the shading in this one. I know it's not everybody's favorite color, but this is definitely one of my favorite colors to write with. I find this to be like a very green version of Pilot Iroshizuku's Inaho, and the shading is a little bit darker. Yeah, I love this color. This color is just so fun to me. It's dynamic, it has beautiful shading. It even has little bits of brown in there that pop through every now and then. It's just a fun ink. Then we have Dominant Industries Autumn Forest. Beautiful, beautiful ink. One of my favorites. The color of this is definitely more of a brownish green base. It does have a little bit of shading if you don't pull the shimmer up with it. And that shading goes down to more of a darker brown green. It's still within the same color. But the shimmer in this is a beautiful like pink rose gold, and it's gorgeous. Absolutely gorgeous. Then we had Herbin's Vert Olive. Like I said, this is like lime green, chartreuse, very yellow green. Beautiful shading with this one as well. And I find this consistency not to be very dry, which is normal for Herbin inks for me. So this one's definitely a winner in terms of consistency. I don't really reach for this color very often, but if I were to pick a light green that is more of a like limey yellow color, I would probably reach for this one over some of the other ones that I have. Then we have one of the newer inks to me, and this is Wearingeul's Peter Pan. Love the shading in this one, and actually comparing it to Troublemaker, they are very, very close, and I'm actually shocked at how close they are. Peter Pan's definitely a bit darker. It has a bit more of a green to it too. It's not as brown as the Troublemaker's Kelp Tea, but the shading in this going to that pinkish color is really, really fun. Very interesting, very dynamic. Definitely one to look for. Then we had Colorverse's Walk the Dog. Again, shading. I think I'm in my shading era. I love shading inks right now. And this one is no exception. It is a beautiful warm green color, has a bit of a brownish green shade going on, darker green haloing. Very, very beautiful. No sheen, just shade, and it's very pretty. Again, Colorverse is a little bit expensive for me, but I like this sample for sure. Then we had Vinta Sea Kelp. Like I said, it really does remind me of seaweed or like a nautical green color. It's very unique. The shade of this though is very similar to the Detox. Like the shade, like the inner shade of this is very close to this. And I think that's kind of interesting. Actually, all three of these are kind of close together, which is kind of fun. Anyways, I have not inked this ink in a pen yet, but the shading does not seem to pull through as much in the dip pen writing. So I don't know if that would be the case in a fountain pen, but it's definitely a very fun shading ink with a little bit of black haloing going on. I can't tell if there's a sheen from the angle that I'm looking at, but it's definitely a very dynamic ink. Then we have Rohrer and Klingner's Alt Goldgrun, which is one of my all-time favorite light green inks, and it is because of the shading. The shading goes almost to a full yellow in some areas and has like this dark green black haloing going on. Very, very cool. The thing I like about this one is the shading shows up in writing, and you can see it here. Like if with this being the initial dip of the pen, obviously dip pens are a little bit harder to forecast of like what it would look like in a fountain pen, but the shading in this is darker and this is lighter, so depending on how the ink pools, it shows up a little bit different in the writing, which is what shading is supposed to do. So it's beautiful that it showcased it here for you guys. Then we had Robert Oster's Detox, beautiful muddy brown green color. This is just such a weird, unique color in general. It's hard to describe. It has areas where it does look very brown, and it has areas where it looks a bit more of like a olive green, and it even has areas where it's almost like a dark green black. It's interesting. I don't know how else to describe that. It's showing true to camera, like true to picture, like in front of me and picture on my little viewfinder. So this is what it looks like, but it's just, it's a unique color for sure. Then we had Noodlers Army Green. Emerald Fusion's trying to take over. Hold on. But the Noodlers Army Green is a beautiful brown green color as well. It's actually showing a bit more green in person, and I don't know why. That's interesting. But it is a nice color, very dynamic color, has some beautiful shading going on with it, and the only thing I have with this brand is the dry time, and just it's not always the best in terms of consistency, but they're very affordable and they have a whole bunch of colors by Noodlers, and this is probably one of the colors I would reach for over the other ones that I have. Then we have Birmingham Pen Company's Emerald Fusion, and as you can see, it is the highest green sheen ink just ever in existence. It is beautiful. It's like writing with an emerald to me. This is so much fun. I'm so glad that it's sheening so hard right now. This is amazing. It definitely is an oil slick sheen. It is very shiny. I have not really spent a whole lot of time writing with this one. I have only inked it up recently in a Heinz pen, and it did great. It's just, I want to play with this ink so much more, and it is definitely on my full bottle wish list because it is just insane with the sheen that's on this bad boy. Then we had Kaweco's Palm Green, nice medium to deep green color. It has a bit of a black sheen going on and a little bit of shading. I find this actually turns out a lot darker in writing than it does in the swatch. So you get more of a dark green like writing experience, but this one is available in the cartridges, which I love from Kaweco because they hold more ink than the converters, but very nice medium to dark green color. Then we had Diamine's Golden Ivy and Ferris Press's Emerald Gardens. I'm really glad I put these next to each other because you can see how similar and also how different they are. So Diamine's Golden Ivy is a little bit darker. The gold shimmer is a bit more yellow, and the sheen is definitely a bit more, like a bit stronger. It's a bit more red in your face. Really, really pretty. Ferris Press Edwards Gardens has a green to gold shimmer. So there's the green, and there's the gold, and the gold is a bit more of a like light yellow color. It's not as like orangey gold, I guess. The sheen on this is not as strong as Golden Ivy. I honestly wish its sheen was a bit stronger, but it is what it is. But this one is, they're very close in color, but this one's a little bit warmer. This one's a bit more yellow toned in the ink base, and this one's a bit more cool toned in the ink base. Then we had Pelikan's Aventurine, nice grassy, leafy green color. It's beautiful. I just don't reach for this one very often. It does not have a sheen in front of me. I don't know if this one sheens. I don't remember it sheening, if I'm being honest. It just has that kind of multi-shading green going on with the same family. It's nice. It's a good consistency. Can't complain about this one. It's just not one that I reach for very often. Then we had Lamy Green, which is definitely a bit of a cool toned green, has more of a blue lean to it, kind of a red sheen going on there, and the shading within the same family, again, much like the Pelikan. It's just green with green with green. It's a really nice consistency. I like the Lamy inks. It's just a lot of them are kind of wishy-washy, and this is no exception. This one definitely has a bit of a wishy-washy look to it when you write with it. It's not super saturated. Then we had Monteverde's Malachite. This is a beautiful, nice foresty green color that's a bit more on the warm side. Really like it, honestly. It's very pretty, but it is a lot like some of the other ones around it. So it is what it is. I'm still grateful to have this sample though and get to play with it, and I'm really excited to see how it behaves if it's much like the other Monteverde inks, which are very great and very affordable, so cannot complain with this one. Then we had 3 Oysters Namsan, which is part of their I Color You series. Dark green with a bit of a black sheen going on. This one is pretty. It's just one I don't really reach for very often. And I think it's because, again, this is a color that I've just tried so many times and I've fallen in love with certain ones over others, which it is what it is. But the color of this is a nice dark green color with a black sheen. The 3 Oysters brand has really cool bottles, like I've talked about, where they have the corner cut off and they can stand on their sides, but it's just a nice dark green ink with some black sheen going on. Then we had Private Reserve's Avocado. Again, this one is just kind of a disappointment to me because I wanted it to be more like the Robert Oster's Avocado, but it is a nice warm green color, a bit of a shading going on. Not really any black sheen, but it may have black sheen at some point. If it does, it's going to be pretty matte. It's not super shiny, but it's a nice color. It's just one, again, I don't really reach for very often. Then we have Sailor Manyo Ishi. This is their newest green addition to the Sailor Manyo line as of this video in May of 2024. And it is nice shading going on. Same shading within the color family. I actually got it to pick up a tiny bit of red sheen in this one, which I hadn't seen before, which is kind of exciting. So maybe if you wanted to paint with this, you could get more of that sheen, which would be really cool. But this is a beautiful, nice, cool toned, neutral, almost neutral green. It's definitely more on the cool side. Just does have a bit of a blueness to it, but it is a nice green for sure. And then we had Endless Alchemy's Mystic Forest, and it has sheen. I am so excited that this has sheen going on. So when I've swatched it before, I've only ever gotten shading, and seeing that it has this red sheen going on makes me incredibly happy. And I just want to dump a bunch of shimmer into this now and make it just a crazy ink because the bottle is just so fun. But this color is beautiful. It's a nice, dark, cool toned forest green color. And with that red sheen, it just really adds a bit of excitingness to it. It's so fun. Definitely a fun one. Have not inked this up in a pen, so I can't attest to how it writes, but based on the dip pens I've played with, it's been nice and flowy and no problems whatsoever. Okay, now I'm going to flip back to my previous green exploration so we can just see some of the other greens that I've showcased and how they may compare to some of these. So starting off, we had the gray greens / greens that didn't really fit in a specific category. Some of my favorites on this page are definitely the Diamine Alpine. It's a wonderful gray green with silver shimmer. Wearingeul's Mad Hatter or even Ferris Will Press Moss Park Green are very close together, and both of those are fabulous. Both the Sailor Shikiori Rikusha and the Sailor Manyo Shirakashi are very good, and they're very close together as well. Even J. Herbin's Vert Empire is nice. It's just a bit on the dry side, but all of these are really fun, dynamic ones. Then there's the dark greens that I did. A lot of these are really close together. Peppermint Drop, Spruce, and the Crocodile by Monteverde are all really close together. Same with the green by Monteverde. These two are practically the same to me, even though they were in different sample vials. But these are all wonderful dark greens. I have bottles of the Yosemite Green and also the Twinkling Tea Party, and I do now have De Atramentis Document Dark Green, which is kind of close to the Jane Austen color. Then there was the olive greens. These are definitely some of my favorites to play with. I did put Inoho in here, but this is probably more on the brown side than it is the green side. But Goose Poupon is close if you wanted a dupe for Inoho, since Inoho has been discontinued. Ferris Press Goose Poupon is a bit more on the green side, but it does have very similar shade in writing. And then Olivine is another one that I have a bottle of. And then the Penchalet's Robert Oster Saguaro Green is one that I have been on the hunt for a while, but it's very close to Ferris Press's Goose Poupon as well. Then we move on to more of the standard green, and Ferris Press Sunlit Jade is the one that I was saying is very close to the Golden Ivy, and I think I'm still going to stand by that. That is really very close to each other. The Ferris Press Sunlit Jade does not have the red sheen to it though. Some of my favorites on this page is definitely the Pilot Iroshizuku Shin Ryoku, which is actually kind of close to the Lamy Green. This one's a bit cooler, but this one's really close. And then De Atramentis Heliogen Green Copper is just such a fun, unique ink. It's like lime green with copper shimmer. It's so interesting. And then we had the light greens. So Ferris Press Frivolous Lime is the one that I was comparing to the Herbin's or Vert Olive. This is a little bit darker, a bit muddier, but I would reach for this one over the Frivolous Lime. But the Frivolous Lime is definitely a vibrant neon yellow-green color. I honestly love the Pilot Light Green cartridges, which is what this one was from. Beautiful shading in that one when you write with it. It's absolutely gorgeous. And then Wearingeul's Secret Garden is really fun too, because it has that kind of like rose gold coppery shimmer with a light green base. Overall, there are so many green inks out there to try, and all of them have a little bit of uniqueness to them, but some of them are very similar, as you have probably seen in this video today. So if you have something specific, definitely see if you can see a sample of it first before you buy a bottle, because you may already have something exactly like it in your collection. Anyways, I want to thank you so much for watching, for joining me here today. I hope you enjoyed this exploration of green inks. Stay tuned for our next color family vote. It will be in my YouTube community this week. I'm excited to see what you guys choose. And if you're interested in any of the previous ink explorations I have done, I will have a playlist in the description. And also I'll try to put it up in the cards as well. But yeah, thanks again so much for watching, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye.